Want to learn about canine obedience, police dog training, learning theory, and more? Jerry Bradshaw has been a sports competitor and police dog trainer for 25 years. As the executive director of the Protection Sports Association, he's been around the world competing and training canines. Welcome to the Controlled Aggression Podcast.
Hi, and welcome to the Controlled Aggression Podcast, where we discuss current issues, training, and best practices in the world of working canines. I'm your host, Jerry Bradshaw, Training Director of Tar Heel Canine Training and Executive Director of the Protection Sports Association. Before we get into today's topic, which is going to be a question and answer discussion for PSA questions that have come across my social media by request over the last few days, I want to talk about the big looming upcoming event that we have, and that is PSA Nationals is getting ready to happen. We're a little over a week away from PSA Nationals in Ontario, Canada, being hosted by Redline Shepherds, PSA Club in Ontario, and the training directors there, Mike Anderson, Ashley Schmara. They've been working tirelessly, working hard to get an amazing event off the ground for us all there. We are likely to have the biggest championship event we've ever had in the history of PSA. I am so excited for what's going to happen in Ontario in another week or so, because we have teams coming from all over Canada, all over the United States. We have folks flying in from South Africa. We've got teams coming from Ireland. I think it's going to be one of the best trials and biggest trials that we've ever had. We've got a great lineup of judges judging the PSA 1 through 3. We've got a great banquet for Saturday night after all the obedience is done. And then we're going to run all the obedience on Saturday as per plan right now, and all the protection on Sunday. So get ready for a really exciting weekend of PSA in Ontario. If you are interested in coming as a spectator, spectators are always welcome for free. You can come to the venue, get more information on psacanine.org, www.psacanine.org, or you can go on Facebook to our Facebook event, 2018 PSA Nationals, and get more information on all of the details like hotels, host hotel, where the draw is going to be on Friday night. We're going to have open field and our directors meeting on Friday. Friday morning will be the directors meeting, and then open field will be happening as that's going on and into the afternoon. After the directors meeting and the open field, we'll have our get-together, our mixer, where we do our draw for order in each of the levels. And then bright and early, because we've got so many dog teams that are going to be competing, we will have everybody at the venue ready to rock and roll first thing in the morning. I think we're going to have a great time up there. So if you're interested in traveling up, come on and visit, see what it's all about. If you've never seen PSA before, come out and check it out. I think we've been having a lot of people that have been getting interested in PSA because of all the turmoil that's going on in the dog world currently around some of the other sports. So we had a lot of people coming and checking us out, and we do appreciate it. We really want anybody and everybody. We don't care if you do IPO or ring or whatever it is that you do. We would love to have you come over and cross over into our sport, even if you just come over and dabble a little bit. But we got some big plans getting ready to happen in PSA. A lot will become clearer after the directors meeing, but a lot is getting ready to happen in PSA. A lot of growth, I think, is going to be happening in PSA. So keep your eyes on psacanine.org, on all the PSA pages and forums on Facebook, to see what's happening, what's going to happen, and some of the things that happen at Nationals and at the directors meeting. So this will be the last one of the last podcasts I think will air before Nationals, and so I want to wish everybody who's going to be competing, including all our club members that are going up to compete at Nationals. We've got competitors in the level 1, we've got competitors in the level 2, including myself, and I wish everybody that goes up there to have a safe event. And good luck to all the competitors who are going to be traveling from all over the world to be a part of probably the biggest championship trial we've ever had. So let's talk a little bit about PSA. Piggybacking on what I was just saying, we've had a lot of people coming over and asking questions about getting into PSA. I get a lot of messages on social media about starting a PSA club and what the process involved is. And it's really super easy to become a club. One of the things that we don't do in PSA is do a lot of club level regulation of how you conduct your business at the club. Your business at your club and how you run it is pretty much the business of the folks that are involved in those training groups. And so starting a new club is a pretty easy process. PSA simply requires to be a sanctioned club that you have a minimum to start out of 3 members, and all those 3 members must be members of PSA. Those 3 members must send in their memberships, which can all be done online. We've got a very easy, streamlined process now of being able to sign up online at psacanine.org. You can order your scorebook for your dog, as well as become a member online. And then as well, you can join as a club online. Submit all that paperwork. The secretaries, who are all volunteers, by the way, we've got a tremendous group of secretaries that are working very hard on your behalf. They get things into the home office and delegate some of those responsibilities to one another, from memberships to club memberships to trials to arranging travel for the directors, for arranging travel for decoys, arranging travel for judges, and things of that nature is all done by volunteers. Everybody in PSA, and some people don't know this, everybody in PSA from myself down are all volunteers. I do not take any money out of PSA in terms of a salary or distribution or anything like that, and nor do any of the directors that are involved in PSA. We all volunteer our time because we have a passion for the sport. So everybody from directors to judges get their expenses reimbursed. They do not get paid to come out and judge. They get their expenses reimbursed, and we hope that the clubs treat them well. Most of the time, they get excellent treatment from our clubs. But we really want to do anything we possibly can to make events happen. So if you're starting a new club and you send in those registrations, if you have 10 people in your training group, then send all 10 in, get everybody registered, and send in your club registration. It costs $100 to become a club in PSA, and that's a recurring expense every year. We will help you find resources that you need. One of the things that PSA does is once you become a club, we will, in our domestic region, send somebody out to do what we call a welcome seminar. And a welcome seminar can be the first event of your first year. And that's basically going to be where we send either a certified decoy, a director, a high-level competitor out to your club to brief your club on what's expected in terms of getting your dogs ready for entry-level competition, how to run your club. There are some differences in terms of how people run clubs, and so that's something that I think is, I've talked about that a little bit, about how we run our club in some earlier podcasts here on Controlled Aggression Podcast. So you can go back into the history of our podcast and check out some of the PSA episodes to find out more about how we run our club and what our expectations are in our club. But everybody's club is going to be a little bit different in terms of, some clubs have training directors that are a little more controlling of everything that goes on. Some training directors are going to be a little more lenient in terms of allowing competitors who maybe have previous experience or have shown themselves to be quite capable of titling their dogs, to give them freedom to experiment in their training a little bit. I spent a lot of time in one of the episodes talking a bit about that. I think sometimes my evolution as a training director for PSA has been such that I've become a little bit more hands-off. I want people to experiment a little bit as long as I don't see anything bad or strange or unsafe getting ready to happen, or I think somebody's making a huge mistake. Of course, I will step in as training director. I'm lucky that I have in our club not only myself, but Sean Siggins, our head training decoy and head police dog trainer for Tar Heel Canine Training. He can step in, guide sessions, as well as we have Ben Lipinski, who has, in a very short time, come along very quickly with his own dog and got his dog titled in PSA 2. He'll be competing at nationals this coming next week, and so he also can help run sessions. We've got a lot of decoys in our club that are capable of running sessions. So we allow our decoys and our training directors to step in when necessary. I had a great experience yesterday at club where I was coaching my niece, who's working a brand new dog, and just getting her used to the rhythm and of healing, and just interacting better with her dog. And Teresa Courier, who's one of our club members and has a great command of competition level obedience at an extremely high level. She was a world team competitor. She came out on the field and helped me coach my niece on how to get her dog a little bit tighter, a little bit straighter, and I appreciate that kind of stuff. Teresa's great when it comes to obedience, and you can see it in her own dogs, and you'll be able to see it when she's competing at nationals this year with her two dogs, one in the ones and one in the twos. So, and then as we morphed into the bite work with my niece, Sean came out and helped coach Alex, one of our decoys and trainers at Tar Heel Canine, on how to improve some of the entries on the dog that we were working with. So it's really a team effort at our club, and I think when people need assistance, we're ready to step in and help. We backline for each other. We're there giving each other feedback. And so it's a very much a communal effort at our club. Some other clubs, you're going to have training directors that are going to want to direct everything from start to finish of when you walk on the field. And you have to decide what it is you want as an individual when you join a club. But if you are starting a new club and you get your paperwork in, we can get a welcome seminar out to you, get you started, and I think you'll find the PSA community extremely welcoming. So traveling to other clubs is usually a fairly easy proposition. You can just ask, and most of the other clubs will be happy to have other PSA competitors come in and train with them when necessary. We have a sister club here in Just Another Sport Dog in North Carolina, and occasionally decoys from that club will come over here, and folks from Tar Heel will go over there. So we try and make those relationships as strong as possible. We've got another club, Cape Fear PSA, that just started in Wilmington. Mr. Kevin Rowland is starting that club, and so I see some trips to Wilmington in our future. So if we have a saying in PSA that if you build it, they will come. Make a club and start attracting people. And it does take time. I'm not going to say that sometimes it can't be a struggle, especially if you don't have some trained decoys or you don't have a lot of decoys that are available to you. But this takes time. It takes development. It takes perseverance to build a good club. And if you're out there and you're trying and you're traveling and you're trying to bring other people in to help you, eventually those clubs will become self-sufficient. So we've got a lot of new clubs this year. We've got a lot of clubs growing in the international region. And anybody who's interested in getting a club off the ground, whether it's in the United States, Canada, or any place in our international regions, feel free to contact myself on social media. You can send me an email. All of the information will be on controllaggressionpodcast.com and how you can get in touch with me. We'll go over that toward the end of the show. But I think if you contact myself or our executive secretary, Katrina Williams, she can be of great help in getting new clubs off the ground and a great resource for getting started and getting all the paperwork through the process of getting approved. These things can take a little bit of time because we are all volunteers, so be patient with us when we get a lot of clubs sending in their paperwork that we have to verify that the members are actually members, and we have to make sure they get their memberships processed first, and then we get the clubs processed, and then we can start on the process of getting your club up and running, get that welcome seminar going. And this is really where once you build it, you can get attraction on social media, especially where people are looking for places to go. You'll see lots of posts on our forum pages on Facebook where people are asking, hey, I am in area X, where, is there anybody around me that's interested in training? And a lot of clubs have formed that way. So put yourself out there, get a club started. If you're not starting a club, let people know that you're interested in training. If you're interested in decoying, that's a huge plus. A lot of clubs will bring in people to do seminars and help train your decoys as training decoys. You don't have to be a certified trial decoy to be a very valuable asset to your club to help develop young dogs. I try and do as little suit work as I possibly can, but I do a lot of development of young dogs when I have the opportunity. We have some young dogs in the club. I do enjoy working those young dogs, and then at some point I will pass off those dogs as they go through their puppy and adolescent stages to the decoys that are more capable than I in the suit and a bit younger than I. So that's kind of how the process works. Get it started, put yourself out there, and I promise you will start to get traction. There are a lot of people that are looking for places to train and like-minded people that are interested in training in an environment where they can focus on competition and get their dogs ready and put them out there for trial. So one other question that came up recently on social media that I wanted to give an answer to is, I think because IPO has had so much traction in and sort of world domination as the protection sport that's been out there for pretty much the longest time and probably has the most participation of any sport in the world, a lot of people ask, why do we not have any scent work in PSA? And the short answer is we do have a little bit of scent work in PSA in terms of at the level 3, there are area search exercises that the dog might have to perform as part of their surprise scenarios. And so it is possible to draw a scenario in the level 3s where you have to do an area search. There are in level 2 and level 3, not so much level 2, but mostly level 3, the possibility of doing retrieves that are blind. What I mean by that is in level 3, you might have a decoy, let's say, throw a retrieve item like could be a metal piece of copper pipe or anything that might actually be able to be small and might fall in the grass where the dog can't readily see it. And the dog might have to go, let's say, over a jump or an obstacle to retrieve. And so as that dog goes over the jump and you give a retrieve command, the dog might not readily see that retrieve item, and that means that they have to actually hunt for it. So a lot of people don't realize that training that type of retrieve exercise is something you have to do in PSA, and it does require a little bit of scenting. It's something I'm working on with my PSA 3 level dog Raptor, doing those blind retrieves with a little bit of decoy agitation prior to and maybe some movement around while the dog has to be hunting. So they have to be able to hunt for that scent item while that's going on. So there is a little bit of scent work in PSA, but as far as tracking goes, one of the things that we decided early on in PSA was we wanted to put the focus much more on obedience and bite work. And I think until you come over to PSA, you don't realize the level of complexity in the obedience and the bite work that's required in order to properly get a dog all the way through a PSA 3. The number of behaviors, the amount of discrimination and generalization you have to work on, the amount of component training that you have to work on where you have to perfect these individualized behaviors and then be able to string those behaviors around in different ways because of the surprise scenario nature of PSA. There's a lot of work to constantly be done in the obedience and in the protection, where having a scent component that would have to be, let's say, a third phase on top of the surprise scenario obedience and protection would, number one, make our trials ridiculously long. And number two, it's really not what we, encountered or sort of envisioned. I would say is a better word. Not sort of what we envisioned in the beginning. We kind of knew that a lot of the people in PSA from the very start of it were in urban areas. Didn't have, a lot of the reason people originally came to PSA was because they didn't have a lot of access to good tracking grounds or the ability to do that. A lot of people that got into PSA were business owners that were running dog training businesses. And so it's a lot easier to parse your time to do obedience and protection. I did IPO Schutzen back a long time ago. And I know how much time it takes to train a really good tracking dog. We train tracking dogs for police work here at Tar Heel Canine, so we know how much time goes into it. And I think it would be a very, very difficult mix if we had a lot of scent work there in PSA. So we focused on the obedience. We focused on the surprise scenario nature of the sport. We focused on being able to train lots and lots and lots of small behaviors that we have to string together. And so that's one of the reasons why you don't see scent work in PSA. And a lot of people like scent work, and I understand that. There are options for doing scent work. And I think when Nationals is over and we make some announcements about the direction of the sport and some of the new things that we are looking at doing, I think the people that are interested in scent work may be even more happy as we move on into the future. There may be some opportunities there. I'm trying to be a little cagey about it. I'm not going to say much, but that's something that I think is going to happen in the future, that some people who are looking for more scent work options under the umbrella of the PSA organization will be able to find. Somebody on social media asked me what makes PSA different compared to IPO and other dog sports. Well, I think one of the big things that the obvious big thing that really differentiates us from the other sports is the surprise scenario nature of the sport. So you don't go into PSA knowing exactly what's going to happen at that trial unless you're in the very lowest of levels. Somebody also mentioned on social media in response to that question that was posted that our entry level, our PDC, is very doable. And I think that's the case. The obedience is not terribly difficult. If you pass the obedience, you can go on and do a fun protection routine that includes a carjacking, a handler attack, and a courage test. And so that initial PDC is meant to serve as a way to show off to the sport that your dog is controllable, and that if you pass obedience, you can go on and do that protection routine and get something a little more than just an entry-level obedience title as they do in IPO with the BH. So this surprise scenario nature of the sport is something that ascends as you go higher in the level. So in PSA PDC, you have nothing surprise. It's all pretty much a routine that you can see, read about exactly how it's going to take place. You'll know what you have to do from start to finish. And I think that really helps new competitors, especially people who are brand new to dog sports in general, to be able to walk on the field with some confidence and be able to perform at a decent level. And then when you move to what we call our competitive levels, the PDC is a certificate, which basically is your entry-level ticket to competing in the 1s and 2s and 3s. And once we make it past the PDC and we have our entry ticket into the competition levels of 1, 2, and 3, we start with surprise scenarios. So in the PSA 1, you have an obedience routine that is mapped out. One thing you don't know in the obedience is what the distractions are going to be on the down before the recall. In PSA 1, I've explained this in detail in previous podcasts. In PSA 1, during your obedience routine, there's going to be distractions on the field, balls, tugs, bite equipment, could be bite suits laying down around. And you've got one decoy sitting on the field in a chair that you have to heel past a few times and then leave your dog in a down in front of that decoy. And while you're walking away to do your final recall, that decoy is going to throw some distraction items around your dog. It could be he might throw a ball, he might throw a sleeve, he might throw a can curtain behind your dog, some noise with these objects. And so that is something that will be unknown to you until the day of the trial, and the judge chooses the items that he's going to use. So you have to cycle through all of those in your training and make sure your dog can hold that down stay and not bite the decoy and not get startled by the things that we're going to throw as distractions. And what's going to be on the field is going to vary from club to club. The rule says strange or familiar distractions, which basically means anything that they can think of. The only thing that's limited is the fact that there's just one decoy, and that human decoy is going to be seated during the entire routine. And then in the bite work, what your first 3 scenarios are going to be 100%. They're going to include a carjacking, a handler attack, and a courage test as dictated in the rules. And then the judge is going to select on the day of the trial one of 5 surprise scenarios. And I talk about this in detail again in one of the earlier podcasts, what those surprise scenarios are. But you're going to have to train for all 5 surprise scenarios to make sure that you're ready for whatever comes up. There are a lot of commonalities in those surprise scenarios. There are a lot of behaviors that are common to all of them. There are some unique individual behaviors. Those are the things that make the sport interesting. So if your dog has a weakness, you have to be able to work through that weakness. If your dog has strengths, of course, we hope that the strengths line up with the scenario that gets chosen. And so it's possible for 4 different people or 5 different people to get PSA 1 with 5 different surprise scenarios. And so that's another thing that makes the sport interesting. And so when you go to a national championship, if you just really were, lucky in picking, or the scenario that your dog was the strongest and got picked in the PSA 1 for your PSA 1 qualification, and you go to nationals and more difficult or scenario your dog struggles with gets picked, you might not do as well. And so that's, again, the one of the main differences, that surprise scenario nature. When you get up into PSA 2, the obedience routine, again, is fairly well scripted. There are some changes that the judge can make in terms of just, on the second leg of the obedience, there's a down in motion and a recall, and the judge can play around with that recall a little bit after the change of positions. You can position the decoys differently, one with the dog, one with the handler, both with the dog, both with the handler, things of that nature. You can have your handler standing, facing away, seated, facing the dog, laying down. At some regional trials, I've put people laying down. Sean Edwards at a recent trial in North Carolina had the handler lay down and do the changes of position from their back, and actually had them get into a body bag that he zipped up about 3/4 of the way. One of the decoys would help the handler into the bag, and they had to do their change of positions from that particular laying down on the ground. And so the judge can make some of those decisions on making it interesting. There's also a retrieve in level 2. And that retrieve item can be chosen by the judge. So it can be anything from, I've had anything from a police patch to, a long distraction string, like something with some cubes or balls on it or something like that the dog has to be able to pick up and bring back. So it can be kind of a big item, a bulky item, a broom. It could be something as simple as, a bowling pin. It's made of wood, anything that's not metal. And so you have to learn to teach your dog a retrieve and cycle through all of these different items and objects, and hopefully your dog will be able to pick up whatever it is that is chosen for you on that day, and that's a 5-point exercise. So there is, again, more surprise that comes in to the obedience in the level 2, and then in the protection you have 3 scripted scenarios, and you have 1 surprise scenario, and that surprise scenario, it's not chosen from a list of 5. It is made up by the judge. There are some guidelines that are in the rule book that are given to you in terms of what it is the judge can make those surprise scenarios around, so you have a good idea about all the behaviors your dog needs to know. It still amazes me how creative our judges are in coming up with really interesting surprise scenarios that are going to be required of you in the level 2. And then once you get to the level 3, you only have guidelines on obedience behaviors that are required and some that are optional, and the judge strings together a obedience routine that can actually have bite work in it. So you can start off by getting your dog wound up with something like a hold and bark. You might have to do a hold and bark with no bite, recall your dog back, start your healing routine. You could send your dog through a tunnel to a bite, have a courage test, out and recall, and then, start the rest of your routine, and then have to retrieve right after that. So the dog having to be able to balance himself from the drive expression of bite work to composing themselves and the neutrality of the obedience work. That's always the struggle, and a lot of that depends on the dog that you have. A lot of it depends on how steady that dog is, and maybe if your dog is a little more of a whack job and gets easily stimulated and gets high in drive and a little unstable, you're going to have to work on neutrality a lot longer with a dog like that. So there's a lot that goes into the surprise nature of PSA 3, and that's why we've had so few people actually get all the way through and title in PSA 3. It's a very, very difficult level in the sport. The obedience is all surprise scenario, strung together and written by the judge based on the behaviors that are provided as guidelines in the rule book, and the same thing is true with the protection. There are guidelines that are written for each of the scenarios, each of the 4 bite work scenarios that are going to be in PSA 3, and the judge is going to make that decision on that day of what the call-off scenario is going to look like, what the courage test scenario is going to look like, what the judge's surprise scenario is going to look like, and what the environmental test of nerve is going to look like. And those are the 4 areas that are in PSA 3, and the judge can come up with scenarios to test that include elements of grading on the bite work as well as obedience during those scenarios. So there's a lot of things to test. Now, some people, when they say, well, what's different about PSA? Obviously, the surprise scenario component is the biggest thing to me. But I think the other thing that's really, really important is the fact that you're competing against the sport because the sport is so hard. Especially when you start getting in those upper levels, you find that the handlers are really competing against the sport rather than competing against one another. So it does provide a lot of camaraderie. You will see people getting very excited about other people doing well. At the last trial this last weekend at Coastal, I had my dog in the level 2s. We did not fare so well. But it was nice to see one of my club members, Teresa, get out there and close out her 2 with her dog Cat, and that to me is one of the exciting things about it. Is even though I did not do well, one of my club members did, and I know because I train it every week, I know the struggles. Just because a dog does really well in a trial, you don't necessarily know the struggles behind the scene with that particular dog. There are some dogs that have very, very, very difficult temperaments for PSA, and some people that, like myself, that choose dogs that are a challenge are going to struggle sometimes, and that's part of the mastery of this sport, is getting through that struggle with difficult dogs. But I do see, we're competing against the sport. We're competing with dogs of varying temperaments, varying controllability, varying power. And so all of that comes into play and makes it a very exciting sport. But the camaraderie, I think, also starts at the top. If you meet any of our directors, our judges, officials in PSA, one of the things that we're blessed with is people who really, really care about the membership, really, really care about how the sport is perceived, really care about the quality of the trials and the quality of the handler experience. One of the things that Joe Morris and I decided when we first began was that this sport was going to be about the competitors. We wanted the competitors to come in and enjoy the sport. It wasn't about aggrandizing the sport itself. It was about the outlet. It was about showing off the training. It was about making trainers better by setting the bar higher. So I think you'll find that from the top down, the camaraderie in the sport is really something to behold and something to get into. And especially if you come from other traditions, you might find that it's a much more welcoming place to come. The other thing that I would say makes PSA different is there are so many behaviors that you have to train. And until you get into it, until you really get down to the nitty-gritty of training a dog in PSA, you really don't understand how many behaviors your dog really has to be able to master. And they have to be able to master them in component fashion. In other words, you can't string together any sort of routine because things are going to change from trial to trial. So your dog has to be able to do a number of things. I've mentioned this on the podcast numerous times before about how dogs have to be able to do lots of different behaviors in obedience and protection and be able to make discrimination. There are lots of times where you could do something in a level 2 as simple as sending a dog over a jump, but what he has to do once he goes over that jump can really vary. It could be he has to do a passive bite after he jumps the jump. It could be that the judge makes you down the dog after the jump. The distance can vary, so it could be a fairly short send over a jump to down the dog where you have a lot more influence because you're closer to the dog, or it might be a fairly long send to where the dog has to go a fair distance to the jump and then down. And then it might be, you might have to, let's say, recall the dog back over the jump without a bite. You might have to give the dog a bite command and have them go forward and bite passive. You might have to, from there, send your dog to a hold and bark. Maybe the judge allows you to send your dog to a silent guard. That was something else that came up in some of the questions was, do you train a hold and bark? Do you train a silent guard? What is it that you're going to train in PSA? And my suggestion was to train both. Some dogs have super clean, hold and barks, and you can really master that. And so you don't necessarily need, to be able to send your dog up to a guard. Now, after the dog outs, I usually recommend people teach a silent guard simply because you want to conserve energy as much as possible, especially when your dog is going to be doing a lot of bites in the level 2 and the level 3. But apart from that, you have to decide for your particular dog, is my dog get a little, antsy, a little out of control, a little too high in drive in the hold and bark. Some of those hold and barks can have some fair duration. You might have to send your dog to a hold and bark, and then you have to move on the field to a different position. And during that time that you're moving to that different position, your dog has to stay clean in that hold and bark for a fair bit of time. So you have to work on not just the fact that your dog can do it, but the duration of it and the dog's neutrality, to slight movements on the part of the decoy. But at the same time, you might have to give a passive engagement out of that hold and bark or out of that silent guard. And so you might have to tell your dog to bite while he's in the midst of doing that hold and bark. So there's a lot of things there that, that you you have to focus on. So lots of behaviors, lots of discrimination, and you're constantly fighting this balancing act to avoid anticipation, as well as you want your dog to do 5 different things after it jumps that jump, from a passive bite to a down to a hold and bark to a silent guard, and eventually it might be to if the decoy is moving, it could be to, in the level 3s, to a moving transport where the dog has to go over and just get in the transport position with that decoy that might be walking away. So there's so many things your dog has to discriminate that's and you're constantly working that balancing act so your dog does not anticipate any one thing over another thing. And that's some of the struggle of PSA, some of the frustration of it, because you can't train contextually, but it makes it also that much more challenging. Another question that came across was, do you think any level 3 PSA dog could be a police dog? And my short answer to that is no. I think we have to just accept what we do for what we do. There's always these conversations about what sport is the most quote unquote real sport. And in the end, they're all sports. They all have rules. When you're going into a building search to find a dangerous felon and people's lives may be at stake, that's a completely different animal. And so I think not animal in terms of dog that you might need, but just a completely different pursuit. And I think you have to understand, and I fully understand, like my PSA dogs, I don't consider them personal protection dogs. They're not they're my competition dogs. If you want to mess with me at a gas station, I will probably shoot you. It's one of the benefits of living in North Carolina. I have a concealed carry permit. I don't rely on my dogs necessarily to protect me. Although I do things with my dogs that, would be considered, police dog like, fended, type work, hidden suit, hidden sleeve, muzzle, all the things that, a lot of the things that we do in police work are going to, there's going to be some carryover and crossover to the sport work that we do in PSA. But I think I've seen some PSA 3 dogs that I think probably would make pretty darn good police dogs. And I've shown PSA 3 dogs doing muzzle work, hidden suit work, all that sort of stuff to, let's say, some high-level tier 1 operators that use dogs in their work. And they say, where can we get dogs like this? And I usually say nowhere, because by the time you get a dog to, PSA 2 or 3, you put in so many hours of work and so many years of work that you're not going to just up and sell them or let them go. So I think I think we have to understand that in the level 3, there's really a mix of power and control that I think is a really good goal also for police dogs. I think we set, and I mentioned this in one of my last podcasts, I think we set the bar way too low for police dogs. We have annual certifications, and those certifications do not do enough for us. They do not push us to improve. They push us to simply remain in sort of a state of stasis. Obviously, different training groups that are working on surprise scenario type work with their police dogs are evolving and making their dogs better year after year. But the certification is pretty much the standard certification if you go to one of the big organizations that are across the United States. I do think that having that control without conflict and a mix with all that power that you need to deal with muzzle work and deal with a lot of difficult distractions in the level 3 is something that we would want to have as a goal. I take a lot of that stuff that I do with our PSA dogs to my seminars when we do high risk deployments, and we teach the dogs to take a lot of distractions like leaf blowers and do fended work with them and make them experience a lot of those things that we do in PSA as part of our sport. But I think we have to enjoy and appreciate sport for what it is, the technicality of it, the precision of it, and then we also have to appreciate police work with its danger and the necessity of good tactics and all that sort of stuff as its own pursuit. I do think we can do better in police dogs and have better quality handling, better quality performance on the part of the dogs and their behaviors, better quality in terms of making it so that we're advancing our dogs year after year instead of just staying at the same level of certification and hoping we're going to pass our recall this year. But I think that's something that I don't really worry about or think about. I don't care if anybody thinks PSA is quote unquote real. Any time you have people running around a field and doing bite work in bite suits, there's a certain amount of non-realism there. There's the realism you get with a police dog is when that dog finally bites somebody, it doesn't have any equipment on, that just committed a violent felony. Then you know for sure whether or not that dog is going to engage and make a difference on the street. And ultimately, if a sport dog doesn't engage one day, it doesn't mean we have to, panic and throw the baby out with the bathwater. We go back and we reassess our training and what we did and maybe some of the mistakes that we might have made in terms of our training and our handling in that particular scenario. I think some of that could be imported into police work where people don't lose their minds because of a little bit of behavior that either we don't understand or we don't like, or, we have to go back and be able to figure out why the dog ended up behaving in a particular way. Maybe the dog failed to engage on a scenario, or did something went out, and my dog did in a trial almost a year ago, and I was working on a lot of discrimination over the jumps to different things like downs and hold and barks and recalls and things like that. And I sent my dog on the courage test. Did fine on the level 2-man attack, and then we went to the call off, and I sent him downfield, and he went probably about 20 yards in front of me and just laid down. Now, does that mean that dog didn't want to bite, or he was scared, or he didn't want to engage? No, he was anticipating some behavior because I overdid something, and I did not properly teach him the discrimination that he needed up to the point of the trial, and he got confused and just did something that he thought would be correct. And so he ran 20 yards ahead and hoped the decoy would come walking in and just give him a bite, which obviously didn't happen. And I had failed that trial. So, and then you have other dogs that don't have that type of temperament where they experiment quite so much with behaviors, and so sometimes you can get through certain types of training with them in PSA a lot easier based on the temperament of that particular dog and his mix of drives and his drive profiles and how all those things interact. So, but yeah, I think I don't worry about that too much. I think a lot of PSA 3 dogs probably could have made really good police dogs. I know that my first 2 dogs that I trained in PSA probably would have made pretty nice police dogs. I had one that probably would have made a damn good SWAT dog. He was super quiet and super powerful, and the only thing, he was a little big, but apart from that, I think he would have made a nice dog working in a stack as far as being a powerful dog and being a nice quiet dog and being a fairly controllable dog. So that kind of worked out well. My other dog, I think, would have also made a nice police dog, probably a nice patrol dog. Next question. Scariest situation I found myself in training bite dogs. Well, there have been a lot of scary situations. I had a fair number of scary situations as a judge. Occasionally as a judge, a dog will come after you thinking you are you are somebody to be apprehended. Remember, in our search for realism in sport, we do lots of bite suit work, lots of targeting. We do lots of, we get these dogs doing muzzle attacks. We get these dogs doing hidden sleeve bites, things of that nature. And then, we get surprised when, a dog decides to go after, a judge or a trial steward or something like that. And it does happen occasionally. So there have been some scary moments when I've been judging where I remember one in California a long time ago. A dog was on the courage test, and I was off to the side watching the dog be recalled from the decoy all the way back to the start cone, and the dog came off, saw me, came running at me, and I held my clipboard out ready to fend the dog off with my clipboard, and he ran right up to me and immediately bit me in the foot as hard as he could, let go, and then continued running back to his handler. And of course, I swiped at him with the clipboard, completely whiffed and missed, and by the time the dog was already on his way back to his handler, but he got one good one in and gave me a couple of puncture wounds in the foot on the way back from his courage test. So that's happened. I did have a dog during a PSA seminar, actually bite me. Luckily, it wasn't too bad, but I did have one come at the crowd, and I made probably a good decision in trying to draw the dog away from the group of people, but then, of course, he focused on me, and I ended up catching him on my sweatshirt. And luckily, his teeth were a little bit filed down from many years of bite work, and a decoy came in and swooped in and saved me fairly quickly. There have been situations where I was doing a different sport, actually, and I just got my dog Ricardo, and I sent him Actually, I was getting ready to take him off the field, actually, and as I reached out to grab the leash and collar that the steward was handing back to me, I think he thought I was sending him on the judge who was passive out in the middle of the field, and he just went. And before I could process everything that was going on, I tried to call him off. It was a little too late, and he had to fend him off with a clipboard, and one of the decoys had to jump in once that happened, once everybody realized what was going on. So there have been a few scary situations, but in the end, we usually had some good safety protocols in place and were able to save the situation. But yeah, I've been bit for real quite a few times. I'm not proud of that. I don't think that's a badge of honor. It's usually because you've made some sort of mistake or weren't paying attention, which in many cases it is. Occasionally get a dog with a faulty temperament or just a whack job with a screw loose, and and it happens. But there have been a few situations as a judge. We get a little nervous sometimes when you come out there and your dog is eyeing us up. I think handlers can be a little bit more focused on that kind of thing, paying attention to what their dog is looking at, and make sure when you come out you care. Better to pull your dog than risk getting somebody injured. And so when dogs show that type of thing, the judge can quickly dismiss a dog in PSA. They feel like the dog is overly focused on the trial steward or on the judge. But at the same time, we are working toward getting dogs to take civil bites and things of that nature in the sport. So we have to be careful, and we have to be mindful of those things when we're showing our dogs. Next question. Is there one thing someone interested in PSA should do with a young puppy? Well, it's really hard to say there's one thing. I will say this. I think when you get into a sport like PSA and there's so much you have to do where obedience has to layer on top of your protection work, I think you have to really lay a good foundation in obedience, a good motivational foundation in obedience. But one of the things I've always done is you really have to focus on the dog at hand that you're training. There's no one set of guidelines. With some dogs, we really build and build and build and build, and we focus more on power first. With other dogs, you can see, especially if you have a fair bit of experience in the sport, and you're with good trainers, and you're with people who understand what it takes to build a dog through level 3. Sometimes you have to look at that dog and say, I have to get in on this dog early. Right? A lot of people say, well, when do you do outs with a dog? And to me, it really depends on the dog. I may wait until later on down the road to work on outs, and with some dogs, I may do it earlier. A lot of people ask, well, what about doing things like teaching a dog how to out and come, recall to heel for a toy and things like that, and recalling dogs off balls and doing redirects on things like that. And I have no problem with that, but I always tell people to be careful, because certain dogs have thresholds, and what that means is I can get a dog calling off of a big tug or a wedge or a toy or something like that. It doesn't necessarily mean that's going to immediately translate to a decoy. A lot of these dogs find the combat, the enjoyable combat that they've learned. Some people call it fight drive. I don't call it fight drive, because it's not really a drive. It is a learned behavior of really enjoying combat, because they always win. So when you have that martial artist that walks in the ring and they always win, they get a little cocky and powerful. And we do this with our dogs. They're always winning throughout their entire careers, all the way to the end. They're always winning. And so when they come out and they're ready to fight, that's a different level of dog that you might have to get to out or get to call off, or things of that nature. So it's for some of those dogs that have that propensity to be that powerful, and maybe don't have the softness or the biddability that some other dogs might have. Well, you might want to get in on those dogs earlier with some of the control work. With some dogs, if you do too much control work too early, then you can squash the drive and the power in the dog. So there's a lot of things you really have to measure and do individually with each dog. It's not really a very cookie cutter thing. With every dog in our club, we progress them a bit differently. And so I think that's one of the hardest things, is to know how to progress and how to get through the foundation training and into the skills, and then start developing those skills without giving up a lot of the power and commitment that you're training initially in those dogs in the bite work. I have seen people overtrain obedience in young puppies to where the dog is too inwardly focused. I've written articles about that. I think that's something that's worth more discussion. I think it's something that is less of a problem in other sports, although I do see strong dogs that cross over from other sports that do have a bit of a time, even if they've had a lot of obedience early on. Once they get into PSA, crossing over is not easy. I always tell people not to judge other trainers based on the outcome of a trial because you don't know what their dog is like. And there are dogs in PSA that have temperaments that are much more suited to the surprise scenario sport. And I think you're finding a lot of people doing breedings and dog selection now that we're, almost 20 years into the sport being in existence, where people are selecting dogs with more of an eye toward what's going to work in this sport better, because there are some super powerful dogs that just don't have that biddability that you want and need in the level 3s. You might get through the level 1 and look amazing. You might get into level 2 and maybe struggle just a little bit. And then once you get into the 3s, it may be almost an impossibility to really rein that dog in, while they maintain the power that they have. So, individual temperament matters. There's a lot of that goes into how successful you're going to be at the uppermost levels in PSA. So I think that's something, kind of to bear in mind. But if you're with a young puppy, the biggest things you can do early on are socialization, environmental neutrality, right? You're constantly building that stuff. You want the dog to have great experiences and feel, like he's King Kong of the world. We do, even when we're doing a lot of our initial puppy bite training and stuff like that, we're, getting him to, run through a tunnel to take the rag or walk over tarps, or, have people in the background that are clattering cans while the dog is biting off to the side to get the dog used to a lot of the distractions they're going to see and hear later on. There's so much, and that's what makes the club training so nice, is because, you really rely on the whole group to do those things, right? You may be handling your dog, you've got somebody decoying, you got somebody off to the side that's, making some noise and distraction and getting your dog neutral to hearing those sorts of things. There's a lot that you can do cycling through those distractions when you're doing your foundation work with the dog, and I think that's super important. Don't overdo your obedience to the point where that dog really doesn't care about the bite work. We need to build a lot of power in those dogs early on to have it last through all of the the work that you're going to do later on in reining that dog in. Some people will do a lot of, do a ton of obedience and, have young dogs doing call offs and things like that. And I think depending on your dog, that may be the right avenue for you and your dog. For some dogs, that may be a terrible way to go. It may be, that dog ends up safety seeking too much and looking for a safe place when the pressure really gets turned on and gets tough, because that's something that's been successful at in the past. So there's always a lot of question about how we're going to manage that in our dogs and their development. So, the best thing is go to a seminar with PSA people. There are people out there that are doing PSA seminars. It happens in any sport where they may be a PSA decoy, let's say, but they just don't have the experience of bringing up and titling dogs in the sport. When you go to a PSA seminar with somebody who has experience, not just bringing up their own dogs and titling their own dogs, but coaching other people to high-level titles, they're the ones that are going to be the most thoughtful about how you need to develop your dog. They're going to understand how much these temperament differentials, and differences in dogs matter. If you have a nice steady dog, you get a good powerful Malinois that has some steadiness to him, that dog can be oftentimes a lot easier to get into level 3s. When you have a dog that's really, sort of hyper and has, for lack of a better word, high activity drive, where they could be doing 10 different things at one time. We all have seen those types of dogs. I have one. Those dogs can be a little bit difficult to rein in when they get overstimulated. You have other dogs that can be made to be neutral to stimulation a little bit easier. Some dogs are a little handler softer. Some dogs are a little handler harder. And so all those temperament differentials matter. But what you want to do when you have a young dog is make sure you get in front of people that are skilled at bringing up dogs in this particular sport. And there are a lot of them out there. There are a lot of great clubs out there. Even if you can't see people like that all the time, make sure you get in front of them occasionally so they can take stock and help you take stock of your training and push you in the right direction. The last thing I want to talk about is trial preparation for PSA. A lot of people ask about that and, kind of how you handle it. And I've talked in previous podcasts about having rituals in how you come on the field and how you come off the field so your dog understands what that looks like. You want to have rituals in terms of how you remove your equipment before you come on the field, things of that nature. What we're talking about here more is just preparation, is just leading up to the trials and knowing when you're ready for trialing and things like that. And I think, again, this is where having a good club and some experience in your training directors, or at least being able to get to people with experience once in a while and to get their eyes on your dog, they can help you with that. One of the first things I always tell people about PSA is if you've come from another tradition where the rules are what they are and there's no surprises for the most part, you are never going to feel the same way in PSA that you felt in other sports. And what I mean by that is, I remember doing IPO, and there were times when I showed my dog where I felt like I wasn't quite really ready. And of course, that happens in every sport where you feel like I haven't done all the things I need to do. I haven't done all the generalization work I need to do. So you might feel not completely ready. Your dog has trained all the behaviors that are required for that sport because you know exactly what those behaviors are, but you may not feel 100% ready that you're at the right level with all those behaviors. That's certainly the case. When it comes to PSA, though, there's so many behaviors and so much discrimination and generalization that has to happen. We were talking about this at club last night, there's a certain amount of luck. And what I mean by that is, you may know that, there's certain behaviors your dog does relatively better than others. And, if the surprise scenario in the level 2s or in the level 3s tends to line up with your dog's strengths, then that's going to be helpful to you. If it doesn't, then you might run into some trouble in your surprise scenarios. I find it in doing the level, having done the level 2s, close it out with Raptor, and then working on my second leg with Drago. One of the things that I find oftentimes is, you get out there, and the most important thing to me when I'm doing the bite work in the level 2 with Drago is, what's that surprise scenario going to be? So once we have the handlers meeting and I see what that surprise scenario is, I really don't worry so much about that 2-man attack. I don't worry so much about the fendeds. With him, I of course do worry about the call off. I've struggled with that a little bit with anticipation, as well as him just blowing it off. So there have been a lot of situations there where I've struggled with that balance in that call off, because you have to do both a send down field for a bite and then a call off, and they flip a coin and you don't know which order it's going to come in. And sometimes it sets up better for my dog, sometimes sets up worse. But I think also when you get to that surprise scenario, I know which behaviors my dog's capable of. He's capable of doing all the behaviors that are required in the level 2 surprise, but some more than others. And sometimes when they're strung together in a particular way, it can create some anticipation. And so, I'm always interested to see how that's going to set up for my dog. And then I have to figure out how to handle him through it. There's always some risk reward in the handling through of those scenarios. A lot of people don't realize that the scenarios are often set up to where there are things you can do to help your dog handle through. Whether it's, moving in a particular direction, the judge may say this is a hard cone forward, and that means you can't move forward from that cone. But it doesn't mean you can't, slice the pie or move off to the side a little bit in order to help your dog and handle your dog through a particular scenario. And there are some times where your dog is set up. I was doing the mock trial last weekend, and my dog was in a down. I was very far away. There was a jump in the middle of the field, and the decoys were running around, and I couldn't see through the jump to see that my dog was being stable. I couldn't see if he was crawling, creeping, sitting up from the down, what he was doing. Then I had to recall him and down him, and I couldn't really see him. So I had to sort of scoot off to the side. But the judge, when he was setting up the scenario, he knew that was going to happen, and so that wasn't a deduction. It was smart handling to be able to move off to the side to make sure I was able to give my dog the down command in time, so that he didn't already go through the jump and I didn't miss those points. So for me, getting trial ready is about assessing my weak areas about 2 to 3 weeks ahead. What am I relatively weak on? And try and balance focusing on training that stuff, because it is possible to overtrain that stuff and create more problems whenever you really try and solve a problem. Let's say, you're solving a call-off problem, or you're solving a hold and bark problem, or whatever the case may be. The very fact that you're focusing on that particular exercise makes it much more available in the dog's brain to where he sees a context and you think it's setting up similar to what you've been working on. And so it can, by putting more effort into that particular training exercise, it can have an effect on how that dog discriminates. And so, he may think, oh, we've been working on a ton of hold and barks, and then you get out there and you have to do over a jump to a passive bite, and your dog goes over the jump and goes into a hold and bark in the trial, right? And that's just because your dog is trying to go off of the context, and he's not listening to the actual words that you're saying. And so that's something that happens, quite often in PSA trials, where the dog does something he knows how to do, but it's not the thing you asked him to do because he's not listening to the words. He's actually just going off of what he perceives the context to be. So I usually assess myself a couple of, 3 weeks out and say, okay, what are the things I need to focus on that are weaknesses? But then I also say, all right, what are some of my strengths here? And making sure I'm balancing some of those strengths with those weaknesses. I already mentioned having rituals leading up to the field and how you're going to take your equipment off and all that sort of stuff. I mean, you want to make sure you're practicing that leading up to the trial so your dog is seeing that. You have to really watch control and anticipation in your dog when you are, leading up to the trial. So for example, I've mentioned before in the level 2, especially, I'll mention that because I'm competing in it currently. In the level 2, you start out, do your figure 8, go up the field, fast, slow, normal, decoys shadowing, you do an about turn, come back to a right turn, down in motion, and then you're going to set up for your changes of position and your recall. Okay, so you start out with healing, and then, the down in motion comes, and now we're going to do change of position and then do a recall. So that's recall number 1. Let's say all that goes well, and decoys are making a little noise, shifting positions. You do your change of position, dog recalls to you. You continue on, make your left turn or your right turn, depending on how the field is set up, and you put your dog in a down or a sit in front of the jump sequence. And now you're going to go down to the end of the field, and your dog has to hold that position, not break, not come too early with the decoys next to the jumps, and do the jump sequence and come to heel position. Then you set up for a third recall on the backside of the PSA 2. In that third recall, you leave the dog and you walk away. Decoys are in the middle, usually playing ball, talking to each other, and you have to recall your dogs through the center of the decoys and down the dog on his way to you. Another recall, if you over practice that down, your recall is going to be slow. If you over practice that recall over the jumps and the neutrality to the decoys, then your dog stands a chance of wanting to break and come to you early, because it is a long walk down there from leaving your dog behind that jump, and he's also out of sight of you. So sometimes on the recalls, if your dog can see you and you're still walking away, you're pretty safe. But once that dog is behind that first jump and he doesn't see you, and you get all the way down to the end to turn around in the jump sequence, you can get some anticipation there. So one of the things that I was doing last night in my preparation for nationals is healing my dog, with some shadowing agitation at a level higher than what we're going to see in the PSA 2, and then just downing my dog in front of the different obstacles, downing my dog in front of the tunnel, downing my dog in front of the jump, downing my dog in front of a window jump, walking away, turning around, facing him, moving in, moving out, walking back, rewarding him in place, rewarding him in place, rewarding him in place. Because I know anticipation on those recalls is a problem. If that happens in trial, you're going to lose major, major points if that dog keeps anticipating all those recalls. I've seen people fail because their dogs just keep anticipating the recalls and do everything early. And so you have to spend time in your training just putting your dog down and going away, going back and rewarding him in place, and doing that numerous times. So the dog really feels like, once I get put in a position in front of those jump sequences, or, put in a position to do a recall past the decoys, they see that context and then they start thinking about what's about to happen. So you have to really work on that balance of anticipation and control. And so for me, as I lead up to trials, I tend to switch things up. So if I want to practice the jump neutrality, where my dog has to go over a jump and be neutral to the decoys on either side, I usually do that as a push. In other words, I'm going to send my dog away from me over the jump, let's say to a place board, and practice that type of sequence where I'm sending my dog away from me, because I don't want him, when I set up for what looks like a recall, to anticipate that recall, because I've had to practice it to do the neutrality to the decoys over the jumps. So, again, when I do my, recalls past the decoys, on the fourth leg of the obedience in the PSA 2, I have to put my dog in a position. I walk away from him. I face him. The decoys are throwing a ball between them. I go back. I reward him. I may do that 2 or 3 times before I ever recall the dog to me. I want him thinking, stay put, I come back to you. Stay put, I come back to you. Stay put, I come back to you. And if you don't strike that balance, then you're going to have some anticipation in the trial, especially if, with the traveling and the new decoys and the new voices, and you're a little bit nervous, and then all of a sudden your dog gets a little bit edgy and he does something like goes to safety seek. And that's something that you have to watch out for. So trial preparation is really going to depend on your individual dog and assessing those strengths and weaknesses. Sometimes you want to, if your dog has to do both, of course, in the level 1, 2, and 3, your dog has to do both an out and guard and an out and recall, back to heel position. If your dog doesn't have a ton of clarity on that, especially let's say in the level 1 where you have maybe over practice the out and guard and under practice the out and recall, and then you start hammering that out and recall, and then all of a sudden your guard gets unstable. So there's always that you're working through. And eventually if you balance your training out properly, your dog we'll just listen to the word that comes out of your mouth instead of trying to anticipate the circumstance. And that's always the fight that you're going to have in PSA for quite some time. It can be maddening, but also it really tests you as a trainer to make sure that you're just not training a dog that's contextual in its behavior, but a dog that can discriminate different contexts based on the commands that you give them. And that really shows to me a level of clarity that you don't have in a lot of other sports. A lot of other sports, the context drives the behavior. And knowing that, you actually make the, you do the work to take advantage of that fact. But here, you can't rely on that. You have to make sure your dog is listening to what's coming out of your mouth. And then, of course, if the distraction level gets high, once you get into level 2s and level 3s, and you've got decoys on the field and level 3 decoys agitating, that's going to interfere with that clarity. And so you're always in that struggle of maintaining clarity of the dog's brain over the context that he finds himself in, whether he's being agitated in level 3s and then being asked to do some precise obedience behaviors at the same time. A lot of dogs struggle with that, at least initially when they get into that level, because all of a sudden now they have to be able to listen and be somewhat calm while they're performing all these behaviors. So first, I want to thank everybody for sending in really good questions. I really enjoyed being able to answer those questions for you today. And I want to thank you for listening to the podcast. Please go to controlledaggressionpodcast.com. Check out the show notes for this show, as well as a link to my book, Controlled Aggression, a manual for police canine and protection training. If you want to get into the things we talked about in last week's podcast on framework for protection and understanding protection fundamentals and understanding how to build upon that to do skills, that's pretty much what PSA is all about, is building a good foundation in obedience and protection, and then going into build skills on top of that in component fashion. Go to tarheelcanine.com, TARHEELCANINE.com. Go to the media area, free resources, tons of them on articles on all different types of training, from PSA to police dog work, tracking, obedience, fight work, criminal apprehension. Everything is on there for free in the media area on tarheelcanine.com. You can go to controlledaggressionpodcast.com and intersect with all of our social media, Instagram, Facebook pages. We've got it all. Let us know how we're doing. Talk to me. I love getting feedback on the podcast. I love getting questions that people want to answer. Gives me lots of material to bring out to the podcast for people who are interested in competing in PSA, or if you're a police canine handler. Let me know things you want to hear about. Take a moment to subscribe to the podcast, rate us, let us know how we're doing. Have a great week of training. If you're getting ready for PSA Nationals, I wish you the best of luck. It's going to be very competitive, but also going to be a great time for camaraderie in the sport. We get to celebrate lots of growth and an international flavor up there in Ontario. I'm really looking forward to it. So in the meantime, train hard, train smart, and be safe.
Thanks for listening to the Controlled Aggression Podcast. If you enjoyed the show, please subscribe, recommend, rate, and review on Apple Podcasts, Google Play, Stitcher Radio, or wherever you get your episodes. Tune in every week for new insights and information. We'll see you again next week.